I think our challenge as planners and people concerned with climate change is to go into the future and grab this problem that's a problem now, and it will become a crisis in the future, and drag that crisis back to the present so that people understand why we have to deal with it now. That is the biggest challenge in dealing with climate change. San Francisco Bay, the way we see it today, is about a third smaller than it was when California became a state in 1850. And it became smaller for a very simple reason. The bay is shallow. 2/3 of it was less than 12 feet deep. So it was very easy to fill, to reclaim. So a vast area, the shallow water of San Francisco Bay, was filled. So with sea level rise, this whole vast area becomes threatened with inundation unless it's protected. Downtown San Francisco, Mission Bay, San Francisco International Airport, Oakland International Airport, vast areas around the bay are vulnerable to flooding. Silicon Valley faces double jeopardy. Silicon Valley used to be called the Valley of Heart's Delight, and it was fruit orchards, and those fruit orchards were irrigated with well water. And in the process of extracting the water through the wells, the ground elevations sank. So large portions of Silicon Valley around the south end of the bay are below current sea level. They're protected through a lattice work of levees between salt ponds. But those levees, as an engineer once told me, they aren't levees, they're just piles of dirt. They weren't engineered to provide flood protection, but because there are so many of them from pond to pond to pond, they provide some redundancy. But in a relatively minor earthquake, they could collapse, and Silicon Valley and many of the IT businesses around the shoreline of the bay are vulnerable to flooding now. We don't have to wait for sea level rise in the future. Retreating from the shoreline might seem like a really good idea. You certainly don't want to put more people in harm's way to flooding in the future by allowing new development along the shoreline. And restoring wetlands is a very good technique for dealing with flooding. All wetlands are wonderful for flood protection. They absorb flood water and they mute wave energy. So the wider the wetland in the front, the lower the levee can be in the back. Tidal wetlands actually do something else. They take carbon out of the air and put it into the ground. They sequester carbon. So tidal wetland restoration projects can help reduce greenhouse gases, and they can also help adapt to the impacts of flooding from sea level rise. That's why we're engaged in a massive wetland restoration project around the bay of restoring about 26,000 acres of salt ponds to wetlands. It's the largest coastal wetland restoration project in the United States outside of the Everglades. So while our estuary is the most urbanized in the nation, it also has the biggest wetland restoration project of any estuary in the nation.